Next, we're going to hear from Laura Reynolds, Executive Director of the Tropical Audubon Society. She's going to speak about Turkey Point expansion and Everglades restoration, contradicting interests. Laura?
Actually, Dawn is going to open up. We're kind of tag teaming this PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to let her speak.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Just so that you guys know who we are, my name is Dawn Shirreffs. I work with Clean Water Action. We are a national nonprofit with offices here in Miami, and Laura Reynolds works with Tropical Audubon right here, actually just down the road a bit. One of the things that we really need to be mindful of as we're looking forward in energy solutions is that there are two convergent crises going on. There's a water crisis and there's an energy crisis. One of the big challenges is that various forms of energy take different amounts of water consumption. Unfortunately, nuclear power is a very large consumer of water. Why that's especially significant here in Miami, there are a number of reasons. One is that we are, frequent drought experienced people. Several of us have had to replant plugs in our lawns. Watering restrictions are a constant debate. So we have a real water supply issue here anyway. We're going to have a very concerning year. We've had a very dry, wet season. And unless our dry season gets very wet, we're going to have an additional drought this year. So in addition to water supply, there's also water quality issues. We face, especially as sea level rise changes come in, threats of saltwater intrusion. And Laura's going to go through some of this, and I'll help along with some of it to show you some of the ways that we believe that the expansion of Turkey Point's Unit 6 and 7 will create further saltwater intrusion, and that's in our Biscayne Aquifer, which is the sole drinking water supply here in South Florida. And then last but not at all least is that we're sitting within a stone's throw of the most significant international restoration project in the world, and that's Everglades restoration. It was the biggest project. We are leading the way in restoration, and Everglades restoration takes an enormous quantity of water. So we'll go through a little bit just to show you sort of the backup for some of these concerns, and Laura, I'll punt to you.
Thanks, Dawn. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Just wanted to point out that we put together a little talking point sheet that's in your packet. So if I speak too fast or you can't understand what I'm talking about, it might be easier to follow along in the talking points that we handed out or ask us questions later. You've got our email addresses. I will start out by talking about Biscayne Bay. And in Biscayne Bay, for those of you who have lived here a long time or know the history, you know that some changes have occurred. We used to have some natural tributaries entering into the bay, and a lot of groundwater. You used to be able to go out into the middle of the bay and actually scoop up fresh water. Then, in about the 50s, we channelized. And the reason we did that is so that we could have a larger spatial extent. But along with that came some problems, and that is the point source of fresh water. Okay? So in order to solve some of these problems, oh, I forgot one more slide here. We also put in some water control structures or flood structures. And so that has a pulsing effect, which also has contributed to the change in salinity and the degradation of our estuary, Biscayne Bay. And so to solve that problem of hypersalinity, we have basically seasonal freshwater flow, we've got change in the flow, also the groundwater decrease, and some of the consequences have been our loss to the food web. To solve that problem, we've come up with the Everglades Restoration Plan, of which Biscayne Bay and the C111 project are the southern end of the system, both of them to increase, basically the southern end of the system needs a different delivery of fresh water, and in most cases more fresh water, and in Biscayne Bay's case more groundwater. So what I'm going to point out to you tonight is that the approximately $22 billion that the federal and state government are spending on Everglades restoration is in direct conflict with this project. And so that's where we're headed here with this presentation. So, and we have also a commitment for stimulus funds for this. So here's the project. For the most part, we're going to be, the Cutler Flowway runs along the edge of Biscayne National Park and the aquatic preserve. For those of you who don't know, Biscayne Bay is protected completely, not only with the national park, but also the aquatic preserve. And in order to redeliver the flow, they have started to purchase the land along the coast. And so that's kind of an overview of it, just to give you an idea. The whole goal of it would be to redeliver the flow into the ground. So the groundwater is the key, and Turkey Point, that's been operating for about 30 years now, this is the existing plant. These are the approximately 8 miles of cooling canals that exist there. And for the most part, this works like a radiator. For those of you who have ever seen this, you can fly over it. There's a huge dead zone, if you will, in this area. There's an interceptor ditch along here that's only about 18 feet deep. And the idea behind that was to make this a closed loop system, to try to make sure that nothing, no contaminants, including latent heat. At the time, 30 years ago, the heat was the problem. At least that's what the scientists at the time were afraid of. And in this case, it's acted as a radiator. It's done its job. But unfortunately, this is only 18 feet deep, so it's in effect not a closed loop system. So we have our typical saltwater intrusion, and then it's become exacerbated by this hypersaline, sorry, I keep pulling the microphone away from my face, this hypersaline tow. And what's that doing? It's pushing the saltwater intrusion that occurs naturally just from our use of groundwater and making that situation worse. So this is what's on the ground today. And the reason to bring that up is we have no assurances that they're going to fix what's already there. We've got major saltwater concerns. We had a huge drought, as Dawn pointed out, this past year that was worse than, I think 1936 was the worst one on record. And you know, this makes the situation worse. So as they seek to build 2 new reactors, our concerns are the radial collector wells, which is the secondary source of fresh water, which I'll go through, the waste associated with that, and where they're going to put it, the rock mining proposed, the road expansion, and the transmission lines and its compatibility overall with our goals for restoration. So this is kind of a, sorry it's light, but just to give you an idea of what the radial collector wells look like, because this technology has never been used in a limestone area. So that, you know, typically it's in alluvial systems where there's clay, a very different environment. And so really it's a science that we know nothing about and how it will react with limestone. It can take up to 125 million gallons a day, and it's 40 feet below the surface. And FPL states in its application that it will moderate salinity. This is not a very good slide, but just so you know, this is Turkey Point. This is where they're proposing these radial collector wells. Here's the Biscayne Aquifer. One thing that I want to point out about the radial wells is that 97%, that's what they're saying, will be coming from the surface of Biscayne Bay. And most scientists don't agree with that because there's a dense layer above the area, this is 40 feet, the Fort Thompson Formation, where the water couldn't possibly go. It's more likely to come from east and west, affecting the Biscayne Aquifer. So, in effect, 3 million gallons of groundwater, of which we're trying through Everglades restoration to restore, 3 million gallons of that will be taken through the radial collector wells. And so, in effect, it will be affecting the groundwater flow that we have currently on the ground. So we're worried, again, that we're spending millions of dollars on restoration, and in the meantime, these collector wells are going to be taking 3 million gallons a day out of Biscayne Bay. Okay, where do they want to store the waste? 3,000 feet in the boulder zone.